Welcome, my YouTubers. Welcome to My Life as a Landlord. You are about to witness a podcast extra 3 getting recorded. And this is all about the ever increasing interest rates. So this episode is entitled Interesting Interest Rates. And what do you do as a landlord and real estate investor when interest rates keep going up and your rents aren't matching it? Some different ideas. So I hope you enjoy. Hello, hello, and welcome to My Life as a Landlord. I'm Dr. Jen, your host, your teacher, your guru. I am I'm excited today that you've joined me. I'm kind of sad that I have to do a podcast extra on interesting interest rates, especially since I've had so many of you reach out to me asking for help on some of this stuff, on what is going on with these interest rates keep going up, both on the Canadian side and the US side. They're just going up because of inflation, and we'll talk about all of that. So I've thrown this podcast extra in. It is not in my normal queue. Normally my podcasts come out every Saturday, but when something comes up, I just throw it in as a podcast extra and it gets aired right away. So I'm just trying to provide some value instead of making you wait 5 or 6 weeks. Here we go. Okay. Oh, sorry, Sid. Okay, here we go. So let's talk about the interesting interest rates. And here's what we're going to talk about today on this podcast extra. Why are the rates still going up? Let's talk about why this is happening, how this is going to impact you. And this is especially true if you are a landlord or you have fixed income or you're working with no wage increase, which is probably the vast majority of all of us. And then what are your options? What are your options with these interest rates, especially if you do not have a fixed rate mortgage locked in at a low rate? You know your payments are going to jump. What do you do? So let's jump into this. So the rates are going up. They're trying to stop or at least slow down inflation, and they being the US Federal Reserve, the Bank of Canada, trying to stop inflation, meaning they're trying to stop the rising costs of goods and just everything being way higher price tag in general, including groceries, including vehicles, gas. Basically everything living is getting a higher price, hence the name inflation. Now, why did this happen? If you are into looking at any of the YouTube videos, there's several YouTube videos out there that will talk to you about how money works and the actual why this is happening. But part of this was because of COVID. Part of this is because we're living on a fiat currency, which we'll talk about. Part of this is because we have a huge exit of our labor force in the form of the baby boomers. Let's talk about this. So the US dollar, now I understand I've got a lot of Canadian listeners out there, and Canadian listeners, I know the Canadian dollar often follows the US dollar pretty closely. Valuable, not. Right now it's at about 1.3 Canadian for every US dollar. So when you're in the States spending money, it's a lot more expensive because you're spending US dollars instead of Canadian dollars. But for the sake of this, just know that the US dollar is basically, it's the base of global trade. When you go anywhere in the world, I can't say anywhere, a lot of places, you will see property listed in US dollars. And so it has become the global standard of trade, including, like I said, property, gold, oil. All of those usually get converted to US dollars first, whatever currency they're in. And so they're traded on the world market in US dollars. And so it's become the US dollar trade. But the US dollar in 1971 came off of the gold standard. And if you don't know what that means, when the US dollar was started, it was started of, if you have a dollar of currency, then it is worth $1 of gold, whatever that was worth at the time. And so there was actually a trade value of something asset based. It was actually something you could go and you could turn it in and get $1 for your dollar of gold for your dollar note. But in 1971, we came off the gold standard. And when that happened, the dollar was based on nothing. It was based on confidence, really, is what it's based on now. And that's called a fiat currency, FIAT currency. If you are interested at all in understanding what that is, I encourage you to Google that term, fiat currency. And what ends up happening is you end up printing more money. You end up printing more money. When you need more money, you just print more money. But as a result, the value of that currency, in this case, the US dollar, goes down. But remember, it is the global base of trade is the US dollar. And so the world doesn't want it to go down, but you just keep printing. And so you get this inflation. And in fact, there's a term called hyperinflation, where everything just keeps going up and up and up because you just keep printing more and more money. And then you add in there the free money that was given away during COVID. The governments were trying to stimulate economies. They were trying to keep people safe without losing their homes, losing their businesses. They weren't always successful in that, but there was a lot of government money that was given away. Again, this was like printing money and handing it out. And as a result, you've got a lot of people that are paying extra money now for these groceries and these properties. Plus, you've got the exit of the boomers. The baby boomers are exiting the workforce. They're going into retirement. We've got this incredible bank of skilled labor, these incredibly experienced folks who are now departing the workforce. And millennials are not entering those same jobs at the same rate. It's just not happening. And so now what you've got is you've got this vacuum of these boomers departing. You've got not anywhere near the millennials entering. And so you've got this labor crunch, which all of us are seeing. All of this is resulting in inflation. And one of the only ways that the Fed and the Bank of Canada, the US Fed, can try to curb the interest rates curb the inflation is to raise interest rates. And so what they're doing is they're raising the cost of money so that it's more expensive to borrow money. So they're trying to tighten the money so that the costs will go back down. How successful are they? I don't know. Even a week ago, the US Federal Reserve had raised interest rates 25 basis points, or that's 1/4%. Basis points is, if you're saying 25 basis points, that's 25 parts of 1% or 1/4%. So if you're saying 5 basis points, that would be 0.05%. Hopefully I'm making sense on that. But regardless, the rates keep going up. Everyone's alarmed. They're going up, and they're going up quickly, which, if depending on what kind of notes you have on your properties, this can be alarming, especially if you've got a pending renewal or an upcoming renewal. So that's why the rates are still going up. But let's talk very in depth as we can possibly do this, is how this is going to impact you if you've got a limited amount of revenue coming in, meaning money you're taking in, whether that's a wage, Social Security, investments, landlording. Let's say your rents are, let's say you have all fixed term leases, and you can't raise the rents. But let's talk more about this. If your mortgage rates are going up with short terms, this is probably going to concern you. So here's what this looks like. Usually when someone buys a property, it's a 25, or if you bought it a while ago, it might even be a 30-year amortization. Amortization means you've got that length of time to pay off that note. And for that, they charge you some interest, they charge you a monthly payment, and whatever are the mortgage terms when they registered the mortgage when you bought the property. But there is also a way that you can have that 25 or 30-year amortization, but you also have a term period. Let's just call it a term period. It's usually 1 to 5 years, where you can change the rate temporarily, if that makes sense. You can change it. So it's usually 1 to 5 years. and you can renegotiate the actual balance of the mortgage. This can be a little bit scary, right? Especially if you've locked in a 25-year or a 30-year loan at 2%. Let's say it was 5 years ago and it was 2%, but you were on a 5-year term and it's coming up to renew and the rates are now at 7%. That's reality. That is exactly what's coming up. So that means that you've got to renew at a higher rate. That rate, as we can see, is likely much higher than before, which means the payments are much higher than before. And if your revenue is set, like your rents are set, your wages set, your investment is set, your pension is set, whatever it is that is set, you don't have any way to make more money coming in unless you go get a job, then how are you going to do this? Further, as a landlord, if your rents are set, you're also battling this other issue with inflation that no one's talking about. The property values are going up, and you're probably seeing properties around you sell for way more than you bought yours, which is kind of exciting until you get your insurance bill or your property tax bill. So what happens is your property taxes are then based on the market value of what the state or province or territory thinks your property is worth. Well, guess what? If the properties around you are selling at a much higher rate or much higher price than when you bought, your assessed value, which is the value that the tax folks will make you pay taxes on, that value, that assessed value is going to be higher, which means, you guessed it, your property taxes will be higher. Even if the rate is not changed, even if your local government doesn't make any changes at all to the property tax itself, because they can also change the rate of what they charge you. But just the value of your home going up or your rental going up, and then the resulting property tax payment is going to go up. At the same time, insurance is going up with different losses and different loss calculations. Now they're looking at what? Replacement cost. Replacement cost is what the insurance company looks like, saying if you have a total loss on one of your rentals and you have to rebuild it at market rate for what you have to go out and find a contractor and rebuild the whole thing, replace it as is, again, at market rate. So market rate of materials, market rate of labor, market rate of timing, waiting for this contractor to be able to get permits and then build. That is what the insurance companies base their premiums off of, is replacement costs. So your replacement costs have gone way up as well. Isn't that a little crazy twist there? So your replacement costs have gone up. You can probably guess that your premium calculations will go up as well. So it's sort of a double zinger on your insurances. So it's not just your interest rate on your mortgage that is going up in this inflation. There are other factors that are going up as well, including property taxes and insurance. So let's talk about this. If you're a landlord and you've got rentals and you're in a fixed term lease for your rentals, you potentially can't cover all of those increased expenses now, right? You might be in a potentially cash flow negative, meaning the mortgage, the insurance, and the property taxes are now higher than the rent amounts that you're bringing in, meaning every month you now have to pay to keep those payments current, cash flow negative. Yikes. So what are your options? We just talked about why the rates are still going up. We're talking about how this is going to impact you, potentially going to impact you, and then what are your options? Now, I brainstormed quite a bit with Mike before I did this podcast, and we personally are in this situation. We actually have several mortgages that are up for renewal. We're at the end of our term, and so we are seeing a jump from around a 5% interest rate up to closer to 7%. And so our notes are jumping as well. I'm in this exact situation. And so it's a little bit frightening looking at this going, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? And so what are your options? Well, if you are a landlord, can you give proper notice to increase the rent on tenants? Proper notice. Now, how do you know this? You go back to your local state, province, territory, landlord tenant code or laws or residential tenancy act, whatever is applicable in your local area where your rental is located, not where you're located, where your rental is located. And look, read where, how to properly give notice to increase the rent. Now it's going to say in there, if you have a fixed term lease, you can only increase the rent at the end of that fixed term lease. Very likely you can only do a rental increase once per year potentially. But again, every state, province, territory is different. And I'm talking for both the US and Canada. So you've got to read in your local area housing code what is applicable in your area. And then you've got to follow that. You've got to give proper notice to your tenants. You've got to make sure that this is working. You've got to do it right as a landlord. Now, here's one of the other things you can do as you are renewing at these higher interest rates. You're renewing these notes. You can potentially have an awkward conversation with your lender, with the lender that has the notes on these rentals. And Mike and I are doing this ourselves right now. You could potentially approach the lender to consider shifting your amortization out to a longer lead time again. So what do I mean with that? Okay. Remember when we said you bought the property with a 30-year amortization, meaning you were going to make monthly payments over 30 years and pay that principal off, or 25 years, whatever is applicable. What you can potentially do is talk to the lender and say, okay, lender, it's been 5 years or 8 years since I bought the property. And now I'm at, let's say, 21 years. I'm just throwing a number out there. It's been some time that you've paid the note down, and say, I'm willing to pay the higher interest rates, the interest rates that they're at now, 6 or 7%, whatever it is. But I'm requesting that you kick the amortization back out to 25 years or 30 years, whatever they would allow you to go back out. Now, some of you might say, Jen, I don't want to do that. I want to keep it at 21 years. I don't want to do that. Okay, well, that's fine. You're going to be paying the higher interest rate. You're going to be paying the higher payment, and you potentially are going to be in a cash flow negative situation. However, if you can extend the amortization, you can pay longer, pay that higher interest rate over a longer period of time. It will bring your payments down a little bit, and potentially you will not be in a cash flow negative situation, right? I'm trying to avoid this situation where you as a landlord are not sure you're going to be able to keep this property, right? So one of the other things you can do as a landlord, you could potentially find other ways to generate revenue. Some of the options that you might consider, you could rent out rooms to students. Some of you are considering, can I do an Airbnb, a short-term rental versus a long-term rental? We've got a podcast coming up talking about that decision. That may not be the best decision. We'll talk about the goods and the bads about that. But if you've got to raise your revenue, there are different ways that you can do that, creative other ways that you can increase that income. And here's the other option, that in the event it just is not going to work, just plain Jane isn't going to work, you can sell the property. You can list it for sale, especially if the market rate in your area is higher. You might be able to list it for sale. Now, here's the problem with listing it for sale. It is very likely you might have a problem selling it. Why? What are the chances that the person that's going to be considering buying your property has to get financing? And they're going to go through the exact same calculation that you are going, oh my gosh, now I have to pay close to 7% for now the purchase of the property with the rents in place. If they're fixed leases, fixed term leases, the calculations that they're going to be doing are very similar to the calculations that you have already done. So it can get a little bit concerning with the options with these interest rates. In this podcast extra, it's a little bit concerning because we are talking about interest rates and inflation itself. Why are the rates still going up? And how will this impact me? And then what are my options. So here's your call to action, all you landlords out there. If you are in a renewal situation, I challenge you to have that awkward conversation with your lender. You need to go there. You don't want to have a problem with making sure that your mortgage and your bills get paid for these rental properties. If you have that awkward conversation with your lender and say, look, if you can kick out my amortization or we can be creative a little bit, then you can potentially. Oh my goodness, now my dog's going to start barking. So that's your call to action. Awkward conversation with your lender. And in this interesting interest rates podcast, I hope you've learned something. One other call to action, if you're interested, there is a YouTube video. In fact, I was just thinking this, that I need to look up. It's Ray Dalio. Let me take a look. Ray Dalio. Oh my goodness. He is an amazing, oh, come on now. There is a, here we go. How the Economic Machine Works by Ray Dalio. If you want to watch this, it's almost like a cartoon-esque way of exactly what I just discussed with you. It's about 31 minutes. It's very animated, and it's in a very simple way on how a fiat currency works, how inflation works. And if you've never watched this before, I've watched this, geez, probably a dozen or more times. I always learn something new, because what happens is you watch this video and you can jump in where you are in the video in time now, because now, last time I watched this, the interest rates weren't going up. The inflation wasn't going up. Now, when I watch this video, it completely changes, because now we're in an upswing. Inflation is hitting. The fiat currency is raging at the moment. So again, Ray Dalio, How the Economic Machine Works. I highly recommend you watch it. But the call to action, pick up your phone, landlords, have that awkward conversation with your lender. You have got to have that awkward conversation. You want to make sure they're in the loop, especially if you're in concern of a cash flow negative property, or you are concerned you're going to have to sell the rental. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching, for listening. Actually, this is getting videotaped on, listen to me. Whew. This is getting recorded on YouTube. The channel is My Life as a Landlord. And if you want to watch it, you can see actually my page of notes here. I've even got a little graph. So you can see it on the YouTube channel instead of listening on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or directly from the website, whatever you're listening from. Thank you so much for joining me today in this podcast extra. See you next time.